Guards burst into the cell. A prisoner lay motionless, brutally attacked. Violent? Yes. Surprising? Not really. In here, if you mess with kids on the outside, you will pay. The man responsible for the 2023 attack at Hakia Prison in Western Australia was 45-year-old Evan James Martin. The target of his violence was 40-year-old Ashley James Brofo. And as the blood frothed around Brofo's mouth and he gasped for air, Martin screamed, "Picture the faces of your victims and say goodbye." And then he delivered a fatal blow. He later said he was proud of what he had done. Brofo himself was a victim of abuse and violence in childhood, but he had without a doubt committed a heinous crime. He was what Australian inmates call a rock spider, predators who behind bars become the prey. And this case stands out. Brofo was serving time in a protection unit, the part of the prison supposed to prevent extreme violence against inmates. Prison authorities later said there was no indication the men couldn't have been housed together. But Martin, who the media called a white supremacist, always made sure to read an inmate's papers or charges when they joined the block. The Australian government was not impressed, handing Martin a life sentence for murder with a minimum of 21 years. He didn't care. He'd first gone into prison for an armed robbery, and after that, he made it his life's work to hunt those kinds of men. Before the murder in a different prison, he had fashioned 2 homemade knives and attacked an inmate serving time for crimes against 4 girls. The man didn't die, but he was left with 47 wounds to his face, neck, back, torso, and forearms. Martin later told the court that he was remorseful that the man didn't die. In a story that sounds like the perfect example of a vicious cycle, Martin was also a victim of childhood neglect and violence. His psych evaluation mentioned paranoid schizophrenia. And joining the cycle was Brofo's stepbrother, another victim of childhood violence in the same house as Brofo. He was serving time in prison for a huge case in 2021 when he abducted a girl from a campsite. But Martin didn't care about cause and effect. Molesters deserve to die, that's all he kept saying. He was just happy to spend the rest of his life behind bars, calling Brofo's sudden death justice for the 9-year-old victim. He called it a public service for his country. With men like him, and there are many, no molester is safe in prison, not even in the protection block. And yet, what came next would make even this brutal case seem tame. Ian Watkins was a bona fide superstar, the former frontman of the Welsh post-grunge punk pop band Lost Prophets. He had it all: fame, money, the adoration of millions of fans, and many of them female, many of them young. And then he lost it all after a series of despicable crimes. Crimes prosecutors said were beyond imagination, that broke new ground and plunged into new depths of depravity. The police had suspected his criminal behavior for years, and not just his drug abuse. In 2012, after being investigated for drugs, Watkins was arrested for those much more serious offenses. He got 35 years to be served at Her Majesty's pleasure at Wakefield Prison in Northern England, known by inmates as Monster Mansion. This place was for the worst of the worst, its units crawling with molesters and home to non-stop violence. Watkins was a dead man walking, and he was prey to extortionists. After a few years, officers discovered he had a mobile telephone in his cell. He denied it was for himself, claiming he'd been hiding it for the other prisoners. This is what can happen to people like Watkins in prison. Knowing that they have a target on their head, they can easily be exploited. When he appeared in court, he claimed the inmates had told him that if he didn't hide the phone for him, he would be taken out. By that, they meant they'd just cut his throat with a razor. And this was Monster Mansion, where serious men don't usually make idle threats. But it went even further. Watkins was still receiving piles of fan mail from his female fans. When other prisoners saw this, they knew that Watkins could be turned into a revenue stream. He was forced to ask for money from those fans, and the proceeds would be split between the men who told Watkins if the cash kept on coming, they wouldn't kill him. The court didn't believe him, adding 10 months to his sentence. Every day, Watkins waited for someone to make a move. The tension built, but no one acted. Then in 2023, the British media reported that the disgraced rock star was set upon by 3 inmates and kept prisoner in a cell. They savagely beat him, stabbing him with homemade knives over 6 long hours. In letters to fans, Watkins later said it was touch and go with his life, that the beating gave him brain bleeds and permanent spinal nerve damage. "Thankfully, I'm still really hot," he joked with his fiancée in a letter. In prison, for a molester, that kind of attitude can get you killed. In one of the last letters he sent in 2025, he told one of his female fans that he, quote, hated weekends. That was when the doors were unlocked and anything could happen. Open cells, a molester's worst nightmare. Watkins was later found dead. He'd been beaten and stabbed in the neck. But his killers weren't exactly upstanding members of the community. One, a gang member, had killed an innocent man in a case of mistaken identity. The other had committed a horrifically violent attack on a woman he'd abducted from the streets. In prison, the most brutal men, the sickest, the most demented, might look for someone that they believe is worse than them and call an attack a justified act of violence. For many who were hurt as children, it's simply payback in a rotten world. And what happened next in Arizona would push the limits of prison violence even further. Ricky Wassenaar had been behind bars almost 40 years. Many of those years added on after he staged a violent 15-day hostage standoff with guards in 2004. In 2025, unstable and extremely violent, he was serving 16 life sentences, and as inmates often say, those men have absolutely nothing to lose. On April 4th, Wassenaar decided he would speed up the removal of his new cellmate from his cell. He waited until the man was sleeping, suffocated him, and stabbed him. He then arranged the body to make it look like it was sleeping. The victim, Saul Alvarez, was what American prisoners call a chomo. Now he was a dead chomo. But Wassenaar wasn't done. He stuck a rock inside his fishnet laundry bag and calmly walked over to a fenced-in area where inmates were waiting to be let into the mess hall. He started swinging at heads and faces, blood splattering everywhere. Two men, Thorne Harnage and Donald Lashley, were left dead. Both were serving time for crimes against young people. Wassenaar's only regret? That he didn't kill more. He had 7 in mind, but he had hoped for what he later called a baker's dozen. The reason such a dangerous man was in protective custody, or PC, was that during the hostage crisis that he'd led in 2004, a female officer had been attacked. As a result, Wassenaar was housed with the other prisoners who had once hurt women and children. But he claimed that he didn't belong there, that he wasn't one of them. Then, when he was told that he'd have to share his cell, well, that was the last straw. He warned the officers he would kill whoever they sent, but they didn't seem to care. Wassenaar later said executing maggots who never got out and hurt anyone again was justice. He was merely obeying the unwritten rules of the prison code in a place where normal people wouldn't understand. "Don't ever call me a monster," he said in an interview. He was a monster killer, and that is very different. The next case proves no one is safe. In American prisoners, where molesters are killed at higher rates than other prisoners, there are plenty of men who would happily share that title with him. That includes the man in this next case, in a story of quite unique brutality. In 2025, at Greene Correctional Institution in North Carolina, a 60-year-old former middle school teacher accused of committing crimes against one of his students was found dead. His name was Ernest Nichols, due to be released in 2027. Unlike the other cases, his crime was a breach of his state's age of consent laws. He got 15 years. For inmates, he was still fair game even if his crime wasn't quite as depraved as others in the category of molestation. But because he wasn't deemed dangerous, he was housed in a minimum security prison with dormitory-style housing. That meant absolutely no protection from monster killers like 41-year-old inmate Wilbert Baldwin. Baldwin was serving a death sentence for second-degree murder. One day, he approached Nichols on his bunk and killed him. The authorities didn't release the details, but Baldwin was nearly twice Nichols' size and strong enough to make the outcome unsurprising. This murder proves that for some inmates, if your offense falls into a lower category of molester, you're still not safe. But maybe killing isn't always vigilante justice. Sometimes the reason is murkier, and it can reach unimaginable levels of violence. Rocky Ali Beeman was serving time at Appalachia Correctional Institution in Florida for a long list of crimes, from murder to kidnapping to robbery. On July 5, 2012, as his cellmate Bruce Hunsaker headed to the shower, Beeman's only thought was justice for a 10-year-old girl. When Hunsaker began showering, Beeman slipped up behind him, produced a homemade knife, and stabbed him an astonishing 80 times. When asked in court why he killed Hunsaker, he said that it was about the girl, about justice. But there was a little more to it. Hunsaker owed him money. And there was more to Beeman than met the eye. He was already under investigation for a murder in 2017 when he was incarcerated in another prison. With men like him around, every day is a gauntlet for the cheaters of American prisons. But some prisoners take matters even further, and the next story proves it. In 2020, 41-year-old Jonathan Watson was an inmate at the California State Substance Abuse Treatment Facility and State Prison when he claimed that a molester had been moved onto his block. And that same man spent all day watching children's TV shows. This should have been a high-security block in a prison where inmates are heavily monitored. But Watson, a convicted murderer, easily got to the new prisoner. His name was David Bobb, 48. Watson grabbed another inmate's cane and bludgeoned Bobb to death. But he wasn't finished. As he was walking toward the officer's area to hand himself in, he spotted 62-year-old Graham DeLuis Conti, another inmate serving time for molestation. Watson decided he'd kill two birds with one stone and bludgeoned the other man to death. In a letter to the Mercury News, Watson said his decision was simple: "I thought I was doing the world a favor. But the authorities, they are big fans of men who take the law into their own hands. And just when you think it can't get any worse, the cycle of prison justice truly never ends." In 2016, a British man named Richard Huckle was sentenced to 22 life terms for 71 charges of abuse during his time as a Christian missionary and English teacher in Malaysia. He also had traveled to India and Cambodia posing as a Christian philanthropist helping poor children. The British press at the time said he was perhaps the most warped human that had ever set foot on its shores. Huckle was pure evil, a quiet, educated loner with extremely twisted fantasies that he shared on the dark web. So when he arrived at Full Sutton Prison in northern England, he was a marked man. But it wasn't until 2019, when he was 33, that his life came crashing to an abrupt end. This wasn't just murder. He'd been slaughtered, tortured by an inmate called Paul Fitzgerald, who later said he was having so much fun he wanted it to last longer than the 78 minutes it took for Huckle to die. Fitzgerald bound Huckle's hands and feet with electrical cable, tightening it around his neck. He beat him in the face, stabbed him with a sharpened toothbrush, and inflicted further injuries with a pen. When officers found him, Fitzgerald was still straddling the body, a grin on his face, blood pooling below him. Fitzgerald later admitted to a court that he might have gotten carried away, but he called the murder poetic justice. The judge didn't agree, calling him a psychopath who was simply deriving pleasure from acting out his fantasies. His psych evaluation was about a meter long and included words such as psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder. He was serving time for violent and sexual offenses, and that had started when he was as young as 13. For him, himself a victim of extreme childhood violence, killing Huckle was payback. When he was sentenced for the murder, he spent most of the time laughing and yawning. His only regret? He wasn't able to kill 2 or 3 more. Now go check out First 24 Hours for Predators in Prison, or click on this video instead.